Long-term Airbnb stays are just really the most underrated part of Airbnb, but they are far from perfect.
Oh, hi, Mark.
Welcome back, Freccero fam, to my channel where I like to explore everything life has to offer. This is a video I've been wanting to film for a while just because I travel a lot. One of the biggest benefits, in my opinion, of being a musician and a YouTuber, which is still the most odd, ridiculous combo, is the fact that I can travel and work when I'm traveling. I mean, it's a fully remote job. And one of the biggest things I love doing is traveling and experiencing as much as possible. Hence the whole point of this channel. You know, all my videos, I mean, just trying different things, whether it's living off powdered food for a month, or traveling, experiencing new restaurants and bars and festivals and pretty much everything I can find. And as you can imagine, one of the most important and crucial parts of traveling is finding a place to stay. And one big thing that I have found that's so underrated is doing long-term Airbnb stays. Now I know, I want to stress Airbnb is not perfect, right? Especially if I find recently, as the years are continuing on, hotels are starting to be a lot better of an option than Airbnbs. I mean, there's no question there. I mean, I've seen some Airbnb costs be insane, especially, it reminds me of like delivery driving, where you go to order Uber Eats and you're like, all right, I'm gonna get a $10 burger, but then it comes to $25 because there's the delivery fee, the service fee, the state fee, the Joe Schmo, like pizza fee and whatnot. And you're just like, it's a $10 burger, but now it's $25. And I've seen some Airbnbs be like, okay, it's gonna be only $80 for the night, but then it comes out to be $150 because of the cleaning fee, but they still want you to clean the place anyway. Airbnb is not perfect, right? And over the years, definitely not liking where it's going, but one of the most underrated parts about Airbnb is long-term stays. This is something I do all the time, and it really allows me to travel and experience so much, especially in a given city. And in case you didn't know, you can rent an Airbnb, of course, not just for a few days, but a month plus. And what's really interesting, similar to buying in bulk, is when you get an Airbnb for a month or longer, you spend way less money. For example, I was actually just looking at this one spot in New Orleans, and on average, this place, if you look at the average monthly night times 30 days, is about $2,800 for the month. However, because of the unique discounts you get when you book for a month, it's instead only $1,327. That's more than a 50% discount. I mean, $1,300 for the month is less money to stay for the month in New Orleans than I spend here in LA. Now, I want to stress, and I probably should have said this in the beginning of this video is not sponsored by Airbnb. They did not ask me to make this video, don't get me wrong. Long-term Airbnbs are not perfect, and I will talk about the negative aspects, but I've been wanting to do this video for so long just because I've had a lot of people say, hey, Mark, I know you get to travel all the time. You get to experience so many new things in cities, different cultures, languages, nationalities, etc., etc. How are you able to stay in all these different places and, of course, budget that along with your finances? Every single time I say, look, long-term Airbnb stays. For example, this is an Airbnb I stayed in Las Vegas, right next to the Strip. It was only $1,400 for the month. I was working on my 6th full-length album where I was going to every single day club, nightclub, and after-hours club in Vegas, doing a song about each club that represented that club in musical form. As you can imagine, a crazy month in Vegas, and I remember thinking like, wow, I'm spending $1,400 for the month to be right next to the Strip. I can go everywhere. It's unbelievable. I feel like $1,400 is probably the average amount a person would spend on hotels for just a weekend in Vegas. And that's why I promote long-term Airbnbs so much. It's just that when it comes to long-term Airbnb stays, they're just so useful. And I do have to stress, make sure you hit like that 30-day mark. If you even book it for 28 or 29 days, you don't get that huge bulk discount. And if you think about it, and this is a very like underrated thing when it comes to long-term Airbnb stays, is one, as kind of simple as this is to say, utilities are included, right? And I know it's kind of obvious, I mean, you're getting an Airbnb, but I mean, if you think about it, if you were to book a place on Craigslist for a month in Vegas or New Orleans or Austin or Denver, these are all the places I've stayed at for a month, you would potentially have to spend the amount on rent plus utilities and all this kind of stuff. Both Airbnbs, that's included. In addition, you get all the amenities and it's furnished. Again, super kind of underrated and kind of obvious, but it is a great benefit. I remember when I was staying in Austin, Texas for the entire month of March, going to South by Southwest, crazy time. I remember the owner of the Airbnb said, hey, Mark, I'm giving everyone free coffee who stays here. So for the entire month, I got to wake up, have this amazing espresso, might as well be more specific, not just coffee, but this ridiculously good espresso every morning. I'm like, this is awesome. In addition, as we all know, you get towels, sheets, you get a bed and a mattress. It's already furnished. For example, when I stayed in an Airbnb in Vegas, they already had a blender, a Keurig, all these kind of little things that you don't really think about, but are very helpful if you're staying at a place for a month, buying groceries, buying food, and you're staying there for an extended period of time. One huge pro tip I will give though, in case you didn't know, this is a very unique and also another underrated feature of Airbnb, is having the entire place to yourself. So for example, let's say you're like, you know what? I'm staying there for a month. I don't want to live in someone's guest room for a month because that can be kind of odd and personal. Like I'll say for me, filming videos, as you can imagine, unless the person really knows like, hey, I have done this. Well, I'll contact them in advance and say, I want to be respectful. I just want to let you know I'm a YouTuber. I film videos. I don't do crazy, weird pranks or anything obnoxious, but I do film videos at home. Kind of weird doing it in their guest room when, let's say, the family's out, or let's say it's another person living there who's just going about their day. So what you can do is you can book an entire place to yourself. As you can imagine, it's going to be a bit more expensive having the entire complex or the studio or whatever is to yourself, but there's a lot of benefits. Like I said, when I was in Vegas, for example, I kind of had this own guest house in the back of the person's property to myself. For example, when I was in Denver, I got an entire studio to myself. Wasn't the craziest or biggest Airbnb, but I'm like, hey, I'm here for the month. The location was prime for anyone who lives in Denver. I was right next to the intersection of 6th Ave and South Broadway. A great location, especially like say if I wanted to Uber out to some of the hot spots of Denver, like Rhino or Lodo or whatever. Quickly jump in a Uber or Lyft, $5-10. It was amazing. And of course, like say if I was out late, I didn't have to worry about being quiet or tiptoeing throughout the house. Like say I come back and I'm super hungry, for example, I don't have to feel awkward being like, should I use the microwave? It is 2 a.m. I don't know. Having the place to yourself does have a lot of benefits, but even still, there is also something nice about having somebody in the place with you. Like, for example, when I lived in Austin for the month, I remember the owner gave me a bunch of suggestions of places to check out in Austin, whether it was the food, live music spots, or whatever. I was walking distance right of 6th Street and Rainy Street, the most prime location, especially because I was there for South by Southwest. Not having an Uber and deal with the horrendous traffic that exists in Austin for South by, also amazing. And it was great to get kind of like a little mini lesson about Austin, the culture, and basically everything I do have to check out. I will say, of course, Airbnbs are far from perfect. Like I said in the beginning of this video, one big thing I do suggest to a lot of people if you are planning on doing a long-term Airbnb stay, I've never had to use this footage, but it's helpful. Always record it before you walk in or as you're walking in. So what I'd like to do, especially if I'm living in a place by myself, let's say I have the entire studio or guest house or whatever by myself, I'll open the door, take out my phone and start recording. I always like to say out loud, hey, my name is Mark Freccero. This is, April 1st, blah, 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 blah. I just got to this Airbnb. I'm just going to do a quick video and walk around it, show you everything. That way, again, God forbid, let's say you get a bad Airbnb owner. Let's say for whatever reason they try to blame you for something that wasn't your fault. You do have the footage that's time-stamped and audio stamped in a way of you saying like, look, I'm getting this footage before I even move in. I just opened up the door just to show everything the way it is. That way when I leave, I can show that the condition when I left was the same condition than when I first got there. One unique thing I will say about Airbnbs as well, again, talking about the pros and the cons and just unique things that you might not know, Airbnb is kind of, I know it sounds weird, it's kind of like a big brother or a big sister looking over you when you are staying there. So for example, I stayed at this one Airbnb that one day I walked in and I remember I came back and all of a sudden, boom, I stepped in, broken glass. And I'm like, what? So I look around, shattered, and I'm not exaggerating, shattered broken glass all over the kitchen. And I was like, WTF. I thought maybe somebody broke in. Did someone steal something? What happened? And turns out, for whatever reason, I don't know why, there's some weird, I think, and this is our guess, we generally don't know, some weird reaction with the stove that for whatever reason, the glass on top of the stove just shattered out of nowhere. Again, we could not figure it out. I did film it immediately right when I walked in, talked to Airbnb, the owner came by and checked it out. And luckily he's like, hey, I understand you did not do this. This is not your fault. We checked the security cameras. We could see that you left at this time. You came back at this time. And because of this and this, even though I did nothing wrong, even though I left and came back and then just saw it, and luckily everything turned out okay. If I was staying at a Craigslist spot and that happened, I may be on the hook even though I didn't do anything. They may have been like, hey, Mark, well, you were staying here. We understand that you left and was fine. You came back and was like this, but we might charge you or whatever. But the good thing is I remember even in that case, I remember talking to Airbnb. As you can imagine, the entire admin team got involved because it was a very, even looking back in hindsight, very weird situation. And as a side note, I didn't even use the stove or oven. I remember looking at it being like, I don't even know how to use this. I'm not the biggest cook, too. I'm horrible at cooking. So I'm just not even going to touch this. So I don't even know what happened still. Even the owner was baffled, being like, even if you left it on, hypothetically, this wouldn't have happened. And the good thing is when I talked to Airbnb about this, giving kind of my side of the story, I also got footage of it, of course, when I walked in, like I said. And when I talked to them, they were like, well, Mark, just want to, just have to ask, do you feel safe? Do you feel comfortable? Do you feel like you want to go somewhere else? We could maybe put you somewhere else because of this happening, because we can clearly see it wasn't your fault. The owner also said to us it wasn't your fault. It's just this weird, we didn't know, chemical reaction, electrical reaction, we generally don't know. And it was cool that when that instance happened, when that weird incident went down, Airbnb was there to immediately kind of help me out. And I do know, I want to say, I have friends who own their own Airbnbs, and I have heard, and this is kind of like a tricky thing, that Airbnb tends to favor the person getting the Airbnb, not the host. And that is kind of unfortunate because, like, say it is somebody trying to do something, a bit messed up or whatever, that Airbnb will typically fall back on the person getting the Airbnb, not the host. But the good thing is we were able to work it out, and that just made me feel a lot more comfortable, especially getting all these long-term Airbnbs that I do. Because, hypothetically, let's say it was someone who broke in, and that broken glass was a window that someone bashed in. They went and stole my stuff. Airbnb would have been there to help me out, putting me somewhere else, maybe even covering the cost of what they stole, just trying to work it out as best we can. And that is good to know because, again, if that same incident happened in Craigslist, for example, let's say I was staying at a Craigslist apartment, someone broke in the window, stole all my stuff, I'd just be SOL. I'd be like, well, I don't know, should I just sleep in my car, right? Like I don't know what to do. But with Airbnb, they're kind of looking over you. That's why I really do love long-term Airbnbs, is just for all these different reasons. In addition to, and I'm really glad they finally did this, because I remember seeing, especially throughout the years, like I mentioned before, Airbnb, I hate to say it, as much as I've been praising them, has gone kind of downhill, especially if you're not booking a long-term Airbnb. I gotta be blunt. I don't think I'd ever book a short-term Airbnb again. Unless there's a very unique situation that was super, a great deal or whatever. I just feel like if I'm gonna stay somewhere for a few days, hotel. If I'm staying somewhere for a month, definitely 100% gonna do a long-term Airbnb. They did add a new feature on the site where it says display the total price, which is very convenient. So as opposed to me being like, oh wow, it's only $1,200, and then I see the taxes and the cleaning fee and then the blah, 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 all the stuff or whatever, and then it gets to the point where it's not actually $1,200, it's $1,800, and you're like, wow, so it's actually 50% more than I thought it was going to be. Now they have a new feature where you can display the total price as you're scrolling through. In addition, another huge pro tip, when you go to look at a place, and I know this is not the easiest thing, especially if you're traveling and you don't know the area that well, but not only do you see the list, of course, of the places, but you can see the map. So when you have that feature enabled using the see total prices feature, what I will do is kind of scroll around on the map. And as you can imagine, if say you're in the heart of the city or in the main hotspot, it is going to be more expensive. Not surprising there. But as you can imagine, if you're going out a lot, and this is something I've done when it comes to this kind of traveling math is, yeah, I'm spending more money to be closer to the action, so to speak, but I'm spending way less money in Ubers and Lyfts, potentially even not having to take them like in Austin. I will say I got lucky with the place in Austin. It's only $1,200 a month to walk to Rainy Street and 6th Street. If you've never been to Austin, let's just say that is probably the most ridiculous deal I've ever seen on Airbnb ever. The fact that I don't even have to spend money on an Uber Lyft. But anyway, again, that's a definite gem of an Airbnb location. When it comes to most places though, and I've kind of had to do this math out, yeah, you might spend less money being further away, but if I'm Uber and Lyfting, let's say every weekend to go out and I'm drinking and I want to be safe and responsible, or if I don't even have a car at all, Well, those Ubers and Lyfts can rack up very, very, very fast. So I do have to do that lodging / transportation type math. But even still, using that feature again, like I said with the map, I'm able to look around and see like, okay, I think this is a good location that is close enough to the action, that's reasonably priced, because if they get any closer to like the main hotspot of the city, for example, I might be spending significantly more. And I'm able to kind of click around, and this makes getting an Airbnb, or in this case, a long-term Airbnb, a lot easier. One really annoying thing, though, and frustrating thing I have to talk about is the way the payment works. Because let's say you're watching this video and you're like, wow, this sounds kind of good. I've never done a long-term Airbnb stay. I want to travel. I'm going to stay somewhere for a month. And like I said, spending $1,200 for the month in Austin is cheaper than most hotels for a weekend. Same thing when I was in Vegas for $1,400 for the month, compared to a random weekend in Vegas at MGM or Caesars or whatever. Great deals, but the way the payment works is kind of annoying. So when you pay for the Airbnb, right, again, make sure you read all the fine print, look at everything, you'll be able to see the final amount. So again, let's say it's $1,400 for the month. The second you quote unquote pay, you're paying. To word that a little bit differently, as opposed to a hotel that kind of holds your credit card and charges you when, like, say you check in or whatever, Airbnb charges you immediately. Just keep that in mind, because this is something you have to do. Again, if you travel a lot, this is something I have to do, and I hate doing this math. I gotta be honest, I hate. But let's say I'm going to a place for a month. Let's say Vancouver. I actually lived in Vancouver for a month. I got to be on the set of Supernatural, the TV show. Huge fan of that show. That month was amazing. Vancouver is incredible. Let's say I'm going there, and let's say I'm spending only, let's say, $1,000 for the month. Let's say I find a gem of a place, great deal, it's only $1,000. It's not really $1,000. It's $1,000 plus however much my rent is here in LA. And I know this is just part of traveling. It's part of just being an adult, if that's the right phrase, I don't know. You have to do this math out where you're like, okay, if I do spend $1,000, I don't spend it when I get there. I spend it the second I hit book on Airbnb. I spend $1,000, and then when that month rolls around, I also have to spend rent, because I pay rent here in LA like pretty much everybody else. So you do have to do that math out. And in addition, the cancellation situations and whatnot can also be very, very, very tricky with Airbnb. Like I said with a hotel, you could book a hotel 6 months in advance. 3 days beforehand, you're like, you know what? I don't think I can do it, whether it's a financial reason, something came up, whatever. You cancel that booking, no big deal. It's almost like nothing ever happened. However, in this same Airbnb long-term living situation, this is true for most even short-term Airbnb situations. If you go to cancel, a lot of the times they're like, sorry, you're going to get maybe 10% of your money back. I've seen some places even say, sorry, if you cancel within, a week of when you're supposed to check in, we're keeping 100% of your money. That's why I always suggest, if you are doing a long-term Airbnb stay, make sure you can do that long-term Airbnb stay, because it's so frustrating and super annoying. Cancellations and getting a refund and everything, the worst on Airbnb. And I hate that they charge your payment right away as well. I don't know what it is, but it's bittersweet, because on one end, let's say I book an Airbnb 6 months out. Well, in my mind, I'm like, all right, I'm going to book it now. I pay for it. Great. And then when it rolls around, not saying I'm getting it for free, but it kind of feels like that, right? Because I'm like, oh, wow, I already paid for this. Oh, yeah. Okay, so in some ways that's kind of cool, but in other ways it's also like, great, like I'm pretty much locking myself in, spending $1,000, $1,400, $1,600, however much I'm spending for that month to go there. But on the other end, it's also frustrating being like, oh wow, I have to spend this money right away, and if, let's say, something comes up, well, no, it didn't. Or if something conflicts with it, no, it can't conflict, because I know more likely than not, I might not get my money back. Again, it's just super frustrating, because there was even some times I found a hotel where I could actually stay there for the month, and it was cheaper than almost every Airbnb in the area, and I'm like, so I can kind of do a very similar thing, right? I guess in a sense, kind of weird. Utilities are included with the hotel. I have the amenities, it's furnished, etc., but I don't have to put the money down now. And if I need to cancel even a day or two beforehand, obviously always check the cancellation policy. But if I have to, cancel 24 hours, 48 hours in advance, depending on the hotel, I don't get charged at all or penalized. I don't have to worry about losing money. It's a nice mental kind of stress-free cushion that exists with that. So I will say, if let's say you are planning on doing a long-term Airbnb stay, which again, I've honestly had the best time doing it. I gotta say, 5 out of 5 stars, 100%. I will never stop doing long-term Airbnbs. They're just so convenient, so much fun. I will say, depending on the person because I travel pretty much almost all the time by myself, that I will say being a month in a place, if you've never been there and it's just you, I will say a month, it's almost a little bit too long. I find for me, again, this is like more of a personal thing. 3 weeks, I find is the sweet spot. Where it's like, after 3 weeks, I'm like, okay, I feel like I've seen enough. I've gone out enough. But I'm also getting a little itchy to be like, all right, kind of want to get back to LA, or I kind of want to get out of here, so to speak. But always remember, you got to book the whole month to get the huge discount. If anything, which is kind of weird, but it's the way Airbnb does it. If you book, let's say 3 weeks, you're going to spend more money, more likely than not, than if you book 4 weeks. Once you cross that month-long threshold, the price drops tremendously because of the huge bulk discount you get. But again, another big pro tip, just because I've learned all this from experience, you can book it for a month. And let's say you realize, oh shoot, I have to leave 5 days before my actual end date. You can do that. I always message the person. Sometimes some Airbnb hosts will give you their numbers. You can contact them personally. Other times you're like, hey Mark, just contact me through the app. I will say, I feel like the app feels a little bit safer just because it's being tracked and documented and recorded, and Airbnb can see the conversations. So a good thing I'll typically do is say, hey, thank you so much again for having me. Just to remind you, I told you I have to leave on the 23rd or 24th of this month, for example, for work. Again, thanks for having me. That way, God forbid, again, this has never happened, but just in case, let's say something happens to that room when I'm not there and I've already left, and they try to put it on me, saying, oh, well, it wasn't like this or whatever. One, I have the video, like I said, when I initially walk in, I have the video right there. But the second thing as well is I can say, hey, in the message chat, I told them I have a documented, message of me stating that I actually had to leave. Here's my reasoning or whatever. So at least that way, again, it's a very small thing, but you never know. Most Airbnb hosts, I feel like 99% of them are amazing. But if you travel a lot, you're always going to get one or two. And sometimes I can tell, let's say if I'm messaging an Airbnb host before I move in, which is another huge pro tip. But again, most are pretty cool. At the end of the day, though, with everything considered, with all the pros and cons of long-term Airbnb stays, they're honestly one of the most convenient and best ways to travel to experience the most out of any area.